David Smith. I don't know how many times we've done this now, but it's kind of a bit of a tradition almost to have a gin tasting with an emphasis on some of the most interesting things that's been released since the last time we were here. It's always part of my challenge to try and find at least one gin that hopefully you won't have tried before. I'll ask you at the end to see if I manage to do that, but hopefully. And we're quite international as well. We've got quite a few different continents represented in what we're tasting today. Ben, could I have one, please? Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, yeah. So, right, well, so as I said, David Smith, I'm gin judge for various competitions. I write quite a lot about gin. I've written a few books on gin as well, and I'm always very interested in what's the newest things, what's the innovative things that have been going on, and hopefully today it will share some of my new favourites with you. So, if we're very close, aren't we, to having the first lot? So we'll start talking about the first one. So this is London to Lima. This is from Peru, and it's 42.8% ABV. It's a grape-based gin using a grape varietal that it would typically be used for making pisco. So to some extent, if you're a little bit fuzzy about the facts, this is kind of a pisco-based gin, although those of you that know anything about pisco know that you can't distill pisco to the ABV required to make it gin, so you can either have one or the other. But it's basically produced in a very similar way to pisco, apart from it's distilled up to the required standard so that it can still be called gin. This is made by an English chap whose family are, and he now lives in Peru, so that's kind of the London to Lima that we've got going on there, and that's reflected also in the botanical mix. So he has imported botanicals of juniper, angelica, orris root, and cassia, but then from Peru, he gets his coriander seed from Peru. He also uses pink peppercorns, but it's a Peruvian pink pepper, which is different to the one that you would typically know. Cape gooseberry, lime, and Valencian orange. So there's nothing in there too much that's that out there and that outrageous or really, really unusual, but it's that approach to having things locally. And also, obviously, the base spirit. And I think when we come to taste it now, one of the things I really think is why this is a very good example is that I think that the grape spirit and the botanicals really work in harmony with each other. So let's have a little taste of this one now. Any initial thoughts from people? Pros? Some people seem to be, some of the smiling faces, which is a good start. Can you taste the spirit? Is it evident that there's something else going on there? Yeah. So I think that that's the case. I think you're definitely getting that fruitiness. There's some floral notes coming up, and actually we've got them to fill in the gin note here, so you can see floral's quite high on that as well, as is the fruitiness. And you've also got this little scene at the top here, which is a reference to where their water source comes from, which is pretty fantastic, isn't it? And so this location where the water's coming from, they had permission from the local village to go and collect it, but it was quite a challenge to drive all the way up this mountain and collect this spring water. So he built a pipeline, and so now the villagers they don't have to schlep all the way up this mountain to get their water. And it's easier for him as well. So it's quite a nice sort of symbiotic relationship between the two. And I think it's also a very, very fun and unusual and delicious gin. The bear you've got on the label there is the a Peruvian bear, and he's wearing a monocle, which was... I meant to bring my monocle today, actually, because I thought it would have been a great prop, but I forgot. But And the monocle is there because we were having a discussion with him about his gin, and it was just someone, I can't remember how we got in contact, but we were chatting about gin, and he said, I've got this stuff, do you want to try it? And we were tasting it, and he said, oh, it's pisco base. And I thought the texture of what he had was so smooth, I couldn't quite believe it. And hence I said, it's a good job I wasn't wearing my monocle today, because it would have shattered. So there you go. So that's the first one. We now move to Spain. No, we don't. Now, let me have a look here. Yeah, okay. So, my cards are in the wrong order. That's what the problem is. There we go. It's fine. So we moved to India, not to Spain, with Hapusa, which is Himalayan dry gin, uses wheat as a base, has a mix of some botanicals that you'd know well, things like coriander and almond and cardamom, but then also has an Indian lime there and mango and things like that. I think the real thing that sets this one apart, the really exciting thing about it, is the use of Himalayan juniper. But I don't know if we've got... Does anyone know where the Himalayan juniper is? Anyone from the... Oh, if we could see, that would be great. Anyway, so it uses this Himalayan juniper, which is much larger. It's probably close to the size of, maybe slightly smaller than a marrow fat pea. It's big from when I've seen it, but certainly, and it's quite hard as well. It's quite a hard juniper to use. So that's something that they've used here. So let's have a little taste of that one. And I'm sorry, do some people not have their samples yet? My sincere apologies for you. You can come and chat to me afterwards if you really want to, I'm sure. Yes, so what thoughts on this one from people? Good spice, yeah. I think there's almost like a sort of minerally, there's a cleanness to it that I quite like. There's a slightly flintiness, that kind of thing, which I think is partly coming through from this Himalayan juniper. And it's 43% as well, this one. So, so that's the second one. If we then have a look at our third one, I think now, yes, there we go. The tribute with a, I'm not sure why that's the case, but a mirror image bottle. Absolutely beautiful and fantastic bottle. I think there'll be a bottle on the bar later, so you better have an actual look at it there. This is the one from Spain. So again, 43%. It's wheat-based. Now let's have a little nose of it first, because I'm intrigued to see sort of what people's thoughts are before I talk too much about it. Lots of citrus, like loads of citrus, yeah. You've got lime and kumquat and pink and green grapefruit and tangerine and sweet and bitter orange. So there's a lot of citrus. And then in addition to that, so all of those botanicals, they're distilled in the alcohol, but then for the lemongrass, they distill that in water. So it's an interesting question about, you know, the ABV of the charge for when you're doing your maceration with gin and for when you're doing your distillation as well. And some things you actually could just use water if you wanted to, and it's to do with the compounds that are in there and essentially whether you can extract them in water or alcohol. And lemongrass is one of the ones that you can extract with, or the flavour they wanted, they could extract just with water, and so that's kind of their approach to doing that. So the lemongrass isn't distilled with alcohol, it's with water, and then that's added afterwards, and that's kind of it's one of the trends I've very much just started to see, which is people looking at what they can do with the water in terms of the proofing down. So, for a long time we've been talking about very pure water or water from a particular spring or something like that, but I've started to see people look at using their water in slightly different ways. So there's a few people that are filtering their water through something that will actually produce some flavour. So I know that there's a gin in California that filters, or at least part of the water they use for proofing it down to bottling strength, is infused with cucumber. So I'm starting to see actually people introduce flavour, not just through the distillation, but through the water as well, which is an interesting take on it. I think every single aspect of gin that you can innovate in now, people are starting to look at. So this is the La Tribute, I think, bright and fresh, crisp. Absolutely fantastic in a gin and tonic. It's from Spain, so in the gin tonica style with all the ice and that, it's just going to be fabulous. And they also make a companion tonic water that goes with it as well, which is in a suitably lovely bottle. Very similar bottle, but in dark glass. I mean, lovely thing, but you're done with it. You think, oh, I've got to throw it away now, which seems a bit of a shame. And they do a mezcal as well. I've never tried it. Anyone tried their mezcal? Someone has, and probably doesn't want to comment. Fine. We now move on to the fourth one. This is particularly exciting. This is very, very, very new. So I don't even have a picture of it. Not in time to put it on the slides. This is 44%. This is the full sample. This is Procera Gin from Kenya. This is the base of sugarcane. So we're also seeing lots of different base spirits as well. This uses Juniperus communis and coriander and orris and cardamom and nutmeg, but it also uses this juniper here, which is the Juniperus procera. So it uses a combination of the communis and the procera. There's been, different people have experimented with different types of juniper, and some people go for the full hog, and they just use some local juniper, although there's some issues with selling that within the EU because it's got to be Juniperus communis, that it's got to be at least in part flavoured with. Personally, having looked at it and looked at maybe 4 or 5 different native varieties in the US as well, I think that the best balance is a combination of the two. So you can get some of the other elements that the Procera adds as well as the communis. And I think I'm right in thinking that this is also, it's a green juniper they use as opposed to, so it's not been on the bush as long as typically the communis would be. So let's have a try of this one. I think quite junipery, just a bit fair to say, and a complex juniper note as well. It's not just piney resin, there's more going on there. There's acacia honey in there as well. There's some spice, there's some peppers, there's some local citrus as well, and I think that helps to sort of round out the whole product with that one. Anyone tried all of these before, or any of them? So there's always been one that someone's not tried, right? Yeah. Ah, okay, good stuff. That was a conversation we were having earlier. Great. So we've been all the way around the world pretty much, and now we are back to something that's far more familiar with sample number 5, and this is the Red Smith dry apple gin, which we've got here. So this is a gin with, essentially, with apple. And we've, this idea of apple gin, as with many of these sort of flavoured gins and all these other things that have come out, there is historical precedent for it, and apple gin was quite the references I found to apple gin were quite popular in the late 19th, early 20th century. Apparently in Scotland, particularly popular. I found no reference other than in this book that I found, which says it's particularly popular in Scotland. So it's a very simple product with just apple and gin, and I think let's just have a little taste. The apple it uses is the Bramley apple, and that is because Bramley apple was sort of created, for want of a better term, in Nottinghamshire, and Red Smith Gin is based in Nottingham. So that it fits in really, really nicely. I think it's, as we've seen such a great rise in different flavoured gins and gin liqueurs and things like that, I think it's really welcome to see people experimenting in slightly different ways and actually having something that's far, far drier, so that you can still get some of those flavors from the apple, because there's certain flavors with apple which are just very hard to distill. I mean, there are gins that use apple, and some of those characteristics come through, and there are some gins, like there's a Chase one and some others that use apple spirit as their base, but again, the flavor is different. But this is quite, I think it's a good way that it still tastes like gin, you're getting those apple flavors, and you can still mix it quite nicely without having to worry about it being exceptionally sweet. Something different, but thoughts on this one? Particularly good, nice. Good mixability, would you say? Yeah. Yeah, and nice to drink on its own as well. I mean, it's 40%, so it's still, it's good, strong gin there. Really nice. I think the reason why this works particularly so well is it's relatively simple, it's good quality ingredients, and the gin that is the base of it, which is the Redsmith London Dry, which if you haven't tried, I suggest seeking it out, is just a very good, solid, classic gin. And so I think that's the quality of the ingredients, that's the thing that sets you up for success, I think. So, just... So we have a couple of these more flavoured gins today, partly or things that are beyond just standard dry gins, largely just because this is such a growth area in what we're seeing, and there is such a variety. And there might be some where people think, I don't like that, it's way too sweet, it's a funny colour or whatever. But there are, in here, some very good examples of them. So we move on to sample number 6, which is the Tanqueray Fleur de Sevilla, which was released this year. I was obviously, before I took the picture, I was a bit eager to try it, which is why the level's down a little bit. So, so this is the 4 classic Tanqueray botanicals: juniper, coriander, angelica, and licorice. It's bottled at 41.3. It's grain base, and then you've got Seville orange, and you've also got orange blossom as well. Orange gin, as an idea, is another one of these things that was around for a while and then kind of disappeared in the 60s. Gordon's made an orange gin, I think in the 1930s. Plymouth had made one as well. There's a few, I think at some point there was a Beefeater one, there was a Seagram's one as well. So yeah, let's have a little, but one of the points that I like about this is that rather than just saying, I want to do an orange gin, let's just stick some orange peel in it, dead easy to do that. The approach is actually, how can we add greater complexity to those orange flavors? And that's why I think the inclusion of the orange blossom works really well. And I think even if you're making a dry gin, if you think, I want to make my gin slightly more citrusy, I want to make my gin slightly more spicy, then thinking about the other botanicals, even if they aren't technically spices or citrus, works well. So maybe a more citrusy coriander if you wanted a citrusy gin, a leafy note like a lemon thyme that's more citrusy as well. So let's have a try of this one. So there is a little, there's a touch of sweetness there, but I still think that it's a bitter sweetness, and I think that's the thing that, again, gives it its mixability. But also, even on its own, it's quite pleasant. My favourite drink for this is actually just with sparkling water. That's my favourite, just with ice and maybe a little garnish. It's because then it's so cold and refreshing, and it's just delicious. Just the simplicity, I think, is quite excellent. Okay. So we've had our 2 fruity gins, and now we move on to an aged gin, which is our sample number 7. This is Martin Miller's 9 Moons. There's a couple of variations of 9 Moons now, which is quite exciting, I think. This is the initial release, as you see here. It's 40% ABV, wheat base, botanicals are juniper, coriander, angelica, orange, lemon, lime, orris, cassia, nutmeg, and licorice. Orange, cassia, and nutmeg, I think, is always very interesting when you're going to do an aged gin, because often the barrel might provide some of that as well. You've got the cucumber distillate as well. the gin is made in the UK, but it's matured and bottled in Iceland, and it's matured in 9 months in new American oak barrels. Yeah, so let's have a little taste of this one. Now, I think what's interesting about this particular product, particularly when you look at the flavour guidance that we've got here as well, is the citrus is really high. And when I thought, oh, an aged gin with a really high citrus, I sort of did a double take. But then actually when you taste it, you can really see that there is quite a lot of citrus coming through. That lime is coming through, and the lemon, and it's real nice, rounded citrus coming through as well. And I think, yeah, I think that it was reflected very well. So that was the first little step on kind of understanding, you know, as people are suggesting different things, how it all works together. So I guess some people have tried this one before, right? Yeah, and then many drinkers of aged gin here? Recreationally? Hands? A few? How do people like to drink their aged gin? I'm always intrigued. How do, just neat or any sort of drinks? Old-fashioned, yeah, the lady here? And you drink it just neat or mixed? Just neat, yeah, lovely. Ben, did you put your hand up? Just neat all the way. Oh, Negroni, as it's Negroni week. Just a Negroni, lovely. Good. Well, it's always good for me to learn stuff as well. I mean, always make the opportunities. So, finally, and I think we're good on time, aren't we? I think oh yeah, there we go. We go, and so I've got this is the sweet bell pepper and nugget chili gin from Poetic License. I've tasted this ahead of schedule, of course. There is a reason why it's at the end, but it is not outrageously hot. It's not outrageously hot. It is, as you will see when you look at it, there's not really any colour there at all, because a lot of its distillation is a very big part of how these flavours are coming through here. This is part of their limited edition releases. So this is something that they had earlier in the year, and I think their latest one is a tutti frutti one. So fans of ice cream, be sure to check that one out. Let's have a little taste of this. So you've got some very classic botanicals which you've got in your books anyway, but then you've got sweet bell pepper, and I'm reliably informed that it's red and green and yellow and orange, so it's the full spectrum of flavours there. Smoked naga chili, which is dried, and then ancho chili, which is also dried, and that's the flavour that you've got here. So I think if you just had the hotter aspects of those chilies, I don't think it would be a particularly pleasant thing to drink. But I think that the fruitiness of the bell peppers has really helped to round it out quite nicely. Lovely. So that's about it. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour because trying to make up a splash of time. And I want to make sure you got a lot of time to talk later. But any questions? Oh yeah, couple. Yeah, Olivia.
The question is, in terms of the gin flavour guidance, there are there's a whole category of aged gins, but is it possible, or are you guys considering putting wood on there as how oak this thing is, or how, because for example, the 9 minutes just came up, obviously there's a lot of oak. Is that something that might make an appearance?
I think that it's something, because there's still, everything's an evolving process, and we're getting feedback and things like that. So I think it's one of the things that we need to consider, or what the best way of reflecting that sort of thing is. I think the same. Huh? Yes. Potentially we could look at expanding the 2 words and maybe putting it in there maybe as well. The lady here.
I was wondering why the Martin Luther was aged in Iceland as opposed to UK.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So it's also because it's bottled with Icelandic spring or Icelandic water. Sorry. So that's why it's made in the UK. It's shipped to Iceland, and that's where it's bottled. And so that's also where it's matured. So sorry, that's the reason. Yeah. Anything else? Any others? No. Great. What did people like best? I always like to ask. Oh yeah, sure.
What would you have this poetic license gin?
Red Snappers are so with tomato juice, like a gin Bloody Mary, very easy one. But if you wanted it in a gin tonic, probably Fever Tree Mediterranean, I think would work really, really nicely as well. I'm sure that there's some variation on some sort of a martini that you could have that would be slightly more herbaceous as well. So, yeah, okay. Yes, I was going to, oh yeah. Le Tribute. No, it's just a sort of straightforward, unflavoured one. It's their brand, but it's a pretty straightforward tonic, yeah. So, lovely. Well, I think that's probably the time. So, thank you very much.